I never imagined a simple notification sound could change my life. It was an ordinary, quiet night, as I prepared dinner while he showered. His phone, forgotten on the living room table, vibrated insistently. I don't usually check his belongings, or at least, I didn't used to, but there was something different about that vibration, as if the device was screaming for me. I approached slowly, my heart already beating faster than normal. The illuminated screen revealed a preview of the received message, just the beginning of a sentence and a name. A name that, the instant I read it, made my hands tremble, my eyes burn, and my breathing falter. It wasn't the name of a work colleague, nor a distant friend. It was someone very close, too close, so intimate with our life that I would never have dared to imagine them in this role. The shock was like an invisible stab, cutting from inside out. I felt the ground open beneath my feet, but I didn't let go of the phone. I needed to read, needed to see how deep this abyss forming before me went. The message began with sweet, intimate words, from someone who speaks without fear, without hiding. It was proof that the betrayal wasn't a supposition. It was a blatant fact there, before my eyes. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just breathed deeply and stored that moment in memory, because I knew that from then on my life would never be the same. It wasn't just the pain of discovery. It was the fury of realizing I was being deceived inside my own home. And before continuing this story, I want to ask you something. Leave your like on this video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments which city you're watching from. I'd love to know how far this story will reach. I returned to the kitchen as if nothing had happened, stirring the pot, listening to the water boil, trying to hide the storm inside me. He came out of the shower, greeted me with a cold, automatic kiss, never imagining I had already seen the message that condemned him. His mask was still intact, but in my mind it had already fallen. While dinner proceeded in silence, the sound of the wall clock became deafening. The ticking seemed to mark not just time, but the end of a cycle. With each second, I remembered the name displayed on the phone screen, a name that would never have the same meaning for me again. The plate of food in front of me lost its taste. The glass of water seemed bitter. I could no longer hear his words, because my head was too full with that detail that changed everything. There, at the table, I realized I had crossed an invisible line. I was no longer the distracted wife who believed in excuses about late meetings or delays at work. I had become the woman who knew the secret, and the secret, like a lit flame, began to consume everything around it. I didn't yet know what I would do, but I was certain of one thing. I wasn't going to stay silent. That night, when I finally lay down beside him, I noticed that the silence in the house had a different weight. It wasn't just the silence of the early hours, but silence loaded with hidden truths. The bedroom, which had so often witnessed confidences and laughter, now seemed a somber stage, where each object held memories that no longer belonged to me. The bedside clock, with its luminous hand marking the hours, emitted a rhythmic, insistent ticking that seemed to mock my insomnia. I looked at the nightstand and saw the photo of our wedding anniversary, where we still smiled as if nothing could shake us. That image now seemed a framed lie, a memory of a time that no longer existed. On the dresser rested the bottle of cologne he always used. Only that night, the smell coming from his skin was different, sweeter, more intense, more feminine. I closed my eyes, and the fragrance brought me back to the illuminated phone screen, to the name I would never have imagined finding in that conversation. The perfume mingled with the memory of the message, and I found myself trapped in a labyrinth of contradictory sensations. Love, hate, longing, repulsion. In the days that followed, the routine of our house became a poorly rehearsed theater. He would wake up, get dressed, have coffee, comment on trivialities, but I no longer heard the words. I observed the gestures, the averted gazes, the long silences. Each movement seemed calculated to hide something, but for me everything was already revealed. The breakfast table, once a place for conversations about plans and dreams, transformed into neutral territory. Only the sound of cups and cutlery broke the emptiness. He read the newspaper, but one could tell he didn't absorb a single line. I pretended to chew, but the taste of food had disappeared. The necklace he gave me on our last anniversary remained stored in the blue velvet box, untouched, as if it were a gift from another life. I looked at it and thought, how many promises fit inside such a small object, and how many of them break without leaving a trace? The most painful thing was realizing that I no longer existed for him inside that house. I could be beside him, but I was like a shadow, a ghost moving silently through the corridors. He didn't see me, didn't hear me, didn't feel me. The emotional distance had become an insurmountable abyss, and yet the name from that message remained like an open wound in my mind, a name that sounded loud even in silence, that repeated in my thoughts like a curse. Each time I remembered it, my breathing quickened, my hands trembled. It was a constant reminder that betrayal wasn't just a possibility, it was a reality, and the traitor slept a few inches from me. Thus, among perfumes, clocks, and silences, I began to transform. I was no longer just the deceived woman. I was becoming, little by little, the woman who planned. The message I had read would have been enough to pull the ground from under me, but life, cruel and precise, seemed to want to give me more signs, as if it wanted me to have no doubts that the truth was before my eyes. 2 days later, while he was in the shower, I heard the characteristic sound of a notification. The phone, again forgotten on the living room table, vibrated insistently. This time, I didn't hesitate. I picked up the device with steady hands, like someone holding evidence of a crime, and slid the screen. The conversation was open, and there it was. The name that had made me tremble the first time was now repeated, accompanied by intimate words, short, direct phrases that left no room for interpretation. Missing our last meeting. Thursday, at the same time as always. No one will suspect. The blood froze in my veins. It wasn't just a suspicion. It wasn't just imagination. It was the raw confirmation that my husband had a double life, fueled by scheduled meetings and poorly hidden secrets. I closed my eyes for a moment and breathed deeply, trying to calm my heart that was beating as if it wanted to escape my chest. When I opened them again, I realized there were more details than I could have endured. Among the messages, an attached proof of a hotel reservation in a nearby city. The receipt showed date, time, and amount. It was impossible to deny. A new revelation within the messages. Beyond the words of desire, there was a practical detail, almost bureaucratic. She asked him to bring the signed documents, something that seemed to have nothing to do with passion. This lit an even greater flame of distrust within me. It wasn't just emotional betrayal. There was interest beyond that. Dinner that night was a grotesque spectacle of dissimulation. He asked about my day, commented on work, smiled with rehearsed naturalness. And I, with the same cold mask, responded in a calm tone, pretending to know nothing. But inside, each word he said sounded like an insult, because now I knew the real content of the messages he exchanged in secret. In the early hours, while he slept deeply beside me, I got up silently and went to the kitchen, and went. I sat at the table, opened my notebook, and wrote down every detail: the date on the receipt, the content of the messages, the name that appeared on the phone, the time of the notifications. I needed to organize the evidence, because with each new clue, my mind became sharper, more prepared for the inevitable confrontation. The atmosphere of the house, previously just cold, now seemed to conspire against him. The sound of the clock was a constant reminder. The perfume impregnated in his clothes denounced secret meetings, and even the cutlery on the table seemed to sound like small metallic accusations. I no longer looked at him as a husband. I looked at him as an investigator looks at the main suspect in a case. Each of his gestures was analyzed, each word, each absence. And with each detail, the certainty grew. There was no turning back. The message had only been the opening of the wound. The receipt and the request for documents were salt thrown on it, and I knew, with the clarity of someone preparing for war, that this was just the beginning of a much greater revelation. After finding those messages and the receipt, I could no longer live in the same house without feeling that each corner hid secrets. Suspicion turned into an almost unhealthy need to search, to seek, to extract from silence the evidence I still lacked. I didn't want just an intuition. I wanted certainties, a collection of evidence that would dismantle any excuse he might invent. I started with the car, because I knew that's where he spent hours, in traffic, or at meetings out of town. I waited for a morning when he left early, and with the spare key in hand, opened the door like someone invading a safe. The smell was the first giveaway. It wasn't the familiar aroma of mild cigarettes and cheap car wash disinfectant. It was sweet, intense, unmistakably feminine. In the glove compartment, I found a matchbox from a restaurant we never visited together. Inside it was a small folded paper with a phone number and the handwritten words, "Let me know." I photographed it and returned it to the same place, as if it had never been touched. Between the seats, pressed against the carpet, was a napkin with traces of lipstick, the same pinkish color I had already noticed on one of his shirts. My heart raced. Each object seemed to whisper confirmation of what I already knew. In the back seat, under the mat, I found an almost empty bottle of perfume. It wasn't mine. It wasn't his. It was hers. The smell was identical to what I had sensed on his skin, and that made me clench my teeth until it hurt. I took photos, noted everything down, and returned the bottle to the exact spot. I couldn't give him the chance to realize he was being discovered. Back at the house, I continued my hunt. I opened drawers, rummaged through folders, examined the most unlikely corners. In the sock drawer, I found a crumpled receipt from a cheap hotel in the neighboring city, with the date matching exactly one of the days when he said he was on a business trip. Next to the receipt was a discarded condom wrapper. I breathed deeply, took a photo, and put it back. I didn't want him to suspect anything. In the office, upon opening his laptop, the browsing history revealed reservations at expensive restaurants and searches for hotel suites in nearby cities. I copied the links, noted times, saved pages. My mind was no longer just that of a wounded wife. It was of a meticulous investigator, planning each step with coldness. The cruelest proof came when I found, inside his jacket, an envelope with bank transfer receipts. Small amounts sent to an unknown account, but frequent enough to raise suspicions. Beside it, a handwritten note. "Don't forget the papers. Thursday. In the suite." There I realized that the betrayal wasn't just emotional or carnal. There was something more. Financial movements. Documents that I didn't yet fully understand, but which sounded dangerous. At night, while he asked me trivial things, as if the world were normal, I smiled and responded mechanically. But inside me, I had already decided. I wouldn't let anything else pass. I was building a dossier. Each photo, each receipt, each object became ammunition for the inevitable confrontation. There was no turning back. I had in my hands enough evidence to bring down his mask, but I wanted more. I wanted to see with my own eyes, even if through someone I trusted, what he was trying to hide. It was time to call in an ally. I already had so much evidence I could fill an entire folder, but what was still missing was something no receipt or object could give me: the live image, the real scene, the external confirmation that would leave no room for excuses. I needed to see, or at least have someone see for me, what he was hiding so carefully. That's when I decided to look for a private detective. I didn't want to involve friends or family. I didn't want pitying looks or hasty advice. I wanted professionalism, someone who would transform my pain into documents, photos, recordings. I called a contact recommended by a distant acquaintance. The man's voice was dry, direct, almost without emotion. We arranged to meet at a discreet cafe in the neighboring town. Sitting across from him, I felt my hands sweat. I told him everything. The message with that name that made me tremble, the hotel receipts, the perfume, the hidden notes. He listened in silence, noting down only the essentials. When I finished, he raised his eyes and said, "You don't just want evidence for divorce. You want him to never be able to deny it again." I just nodded, swallowing hard. The agreement was simple. He would follow my husband for a few days, record his movements, send me reports and evidence. No confrontations, just observation. I paid in advance, like someone buying not a service, but a piece of peace. The first days were a mixture of anxiety and torment. I followed my routine normally, woke up early, took care of the house, went to work, but each vibration of the phone made me shudder, hoping it would be an update from the detective. And then, on a rainy afternoon, the report arrived. I opened the files with trembling hands. They were photos. There he was, my husband, in the parking lot of a restaurant we never visited together. He was wearing the same jacket he wore when he said he was staying late at the office. Beside him, the woman whose name had appeared in the message, laughing, touching his arm, as if they were a legitimate couple. Another photo. The two of them entering a simple but discreet hotel. He opened the car door for her, like a dedicated gentleman. Yet another, a wine glass being raised, his face reflecting the flame of a candle lit on the table. And finally, a short video, the two of them walking hand in hand, unconcerned, as if they had nothing to hide. My heart raced. It wasn't just a betrayal. It was a built, cultivated relationship, nourished before my eyes without my knowledge. In the report, the detective added something that chilled me, an audio captured from a distance, where my husband could be heard mentioning the papers and her signature. They weren't just romantic meetings. There was some financial interest being negotiated. I spent the whole night listening to that audio repeatedly, trying to decipher each word. The mistress laughed, responded with short phrases, and he promised that soon everything would be resolved. Resolved what? My marriage? My family's assets? My entire life. The next day, I met with the detective again. He handed me an organized dossier, dated photos, short videos, time notes, location records, all impeccable. I leafed through the pages and felt as if each piece of evidence was a hammer blow on a coffin he himself had built. There, I realized it was no longer a question of doubt. It was a question of time. I had the confirmation I needed, and with it, the pain I never imagined feeling. My husband wasn't just betraying me, he was diminishing me, deceiving me, and plotting something bigger behind my back. The next step would no longer be to seek evidence. I already had it. The next step would be to plan how he would taste his own poison. The photos were already cruel, but nothing prepared me for the weight of the words I heard in the audio recorded by the detective. He called me to a corner with the report folder open and placed the headphones on the table. "Listen," he said, and left, leaving me alone with the truth. The recording began with muffled laughter, glasses clinking in a restaurant. Soon after, his voice, my husband's, sounded clear, firm, almost cold. "As soon as she signs the bakery renewal papers, the rest becomes easy. The property can go to the company's name and we divide it quietly." My stomach turned. It wasn't enough to betray my heart and body. He was planning to take away what we built with sweat. Each early morning at the bakery, each batch of bread that sustained our family. Her voice, soft and cynical, completed. "And the house? You promised you'd resolve that too." He responded without hesitating. "When the divorce comes, it will seem natural. She won't have time to react." The words were like punches. It wasn't just a hidden romance. It was a project of destruction, a conspiracy against me, against my home, against the memory of my father who started that business with his own calloused hands. Further on in the audio, I heard something even more cunning. He was saying, "The son won't understand anything. He'll take my side, not hers." The mistress's laughter echoed, and I felt my hands tremble with such fury. From that moment, it wasn't just about emotional revenge. It was about survival. I couldn't allow him to get his hands on the bakery, on the property, on my family's legacy. I ran to my documents. I rummaged through drawers, old folders, looked for contracts, deeds. I discovered strange movements, a different signature on a receipt, a power of attorney registered without my knowledge, details that, before, I would have ignored, but which now fit into the puzzle. I called my lawyer and told her everything. She was clear. "You need to anticipate. Register all the evidence with a notary. Block any transfer attempt. Put the content of these audios in a notarial deed." That's what I did. I spent days gathering every piece of paper, every receipt, every recording, every screenshot. I transformed my pain into an arsenal. But it wasn't just the lawyer who helped me. My own fury guided me. I began to think about how to return in kind, how to expose not just the infidelity, but the financial scheme. I wanted the entire town to know that this man wasn't just a betrayer in bed, but also a thief of trust, ready to snatch the bread from the mouth of those who believed in him. In the early hours, while reviewing the audios, I noticed a hidden detail. In the background, in one of the recordings, there was the sound of a car engine, followed by a horn I knew well, that of one of our neighbors. This meant that, even unintentionally, someone from the neighborhood had been an indirect witness to the meeting, and this person could confirm, if necessary, that they were where they claimed not to be. The sandcastle my husband was building was about to collapse, and I, with each piece of evidence in hand, was preparing to push the first domino piece. The love I once felt had transformed into a dark and determined force. I no longer cried. I planned. And the next step would be to choose the right way to expose not just the intimate betrayal, but the silent crime he was plotting against everything I was. Anger woke me up like a broken clock, always at the same moment, always with the same intensity. I didn't want blood, didn't want violence. I wanted something that would leave them without masks, that would transform the lie into evidence and shame into a public consequence. I wanted justice, not a sordid spectacle. It was in that exact place that my plan was born. Cold, calculated, and irresistibly clear. First step, legality. I talked at length with my lawyer and explained everything in the minutest detail. No impulsive actions or creative revenge that could put me on the wrong side of the law. She advised me to consolidate all the evidence, audios, screenshots, photos, receipts, in a formal file, register everything in a notarial deed, and ensure that any public exposure would be backed by documents and professional guidance. Legal security gave me the practical courage I needed. I could expose the truth without burning myself with accusations of defamation. Meanwhile, I framed my fury in logistics. With the detectives' help, I traced their routine. Preferred places, meeting days, times when they lowered their guard. The pattern was predictable, always something that a loving heart thinks it hides, but that practical life usually yields in repetitions. Each confirmed meeting was another piece in the puzzle. New discovery. The detective brought me a photo in which, in the background, appeared the facade of an accounting office. This confirmed that the documents mentioned in the messages weren't mere formalities. There were people involved and accomplices who could arrange dates and signatures. The dimension of the scheme was growing. I then planned the public exposure, but with a clear head. Instead of humiliating for humiliation's sake, I chose a legitimate stage. The town fair, a Saturday morning, where there was movement, natural witnesses, and no one could claim a private setup. I asked the detective to prepare a dossier printed on simple and clear panels, photos with captions, audio transcriptions, receipts, and a timeline. Nothing too sensationalistic, just facts, organized so that anyone could read and understand. My intention was for the truth to speak for itself. In parallel, I notified authorities and filed part of the evidence with a notary. I informed my lawyer that there would be a formal action if my husband made any attempt at asset transfer. I put a legal alert on the banking movements of the family business and requested emergency audits from the accountant. All this without fanfare, so as not to alert the conspirators. Defending the assets would be as important as exposing the betrayal. A call from the accountant revealed that, in the last week, a request for cadastral modification had been initiated in the name of an unknown company. It was confirmation that they had already taken the first practical steps. Their haste gave me even more reason to accelerate my own movements. In the days preceding the exposure, I acted with cold wine, calm. I appeared at the fair as I always had, greeted neighbors, took my son to the park, feigned normalcy. It was a controlled mask so that the impact of the truth would be more effective. In parallel, I arranged with a trusted neighbor, a respected gentleman in the neighborhood, that he would deliver a public letter I wrote just before the stalls opened. A dry, objective letter, inviting whoever wanted to see the evidence and decide for themselves. No insults, no dramatic victimization, just an invitation to read the facts. D-Day. The mural was ready. Panels with large photos, legible transcriptions, scanned receipts. The detective was positioned discreetly, ready to document the reaction and witness any attempt at aggression or denial. My lawyer was a phone call away. The legal and logistical framework was set. At the moment the couple appeared in the square, their faces were painted with normalcy. My husband still believed he could close his eyes to reality. That's when the town began to look. One by one, people approached, read, whispered, and the truth began to materialize before them. There were no shouts from me. I handed my letter to the neighbor, who read aloud short and direct phrases about the evidence and about the legal steps that had already been activated. I let the facts dismantle the farce. Shame did the rest. Looks, social distancing, the feeling of being naked in the public square. But my goal wasn't just to humiliate. It was to protect. As the community reacted, I formally requested that the City Hall and local notary receive copies of the documents. Thus, the public exposure was accompanied by official records, so that any attempt at fixing behind the scenes would be easily detected. I wanted everything to be documented, so that the truth would last far beyond the day's buzz. In the aftermath, I realized something profound. Revenge, when not savage, can become a catalyst for change. The exposure opened doors for other details to be investigated: suppliers who noticed strange payments, employees who remembered suspicious conversations. The town, previously unaware, began to look with attention, and I didn't need to dirty my hands with anything illegal. I simply placed the truth in the right place, public and documented. And in the silence that came after the storm, when people dispersed and I gathered the papers, I knew I had chosen the most difficult path, but also the fairest. Their humiliation was a consequence of the choice they made. My victory, if there was one, would be to maintain the integrity of the legacy that had been entrusted to me, and to rebuild, with dignity, what had almost been stolen. Saturday dawned with a timid sun, as if the sky itself knew that day would not be like others. The town fair was full: smell of fresh bread, colorful fruits displayed on stalls, children running between the booths. Everything seemed normal, but I knew it wasn't. I was ready. The mural with the evidence was already discreetly set up in a strategic corner of the square. Enlarged photos, legible receipts, audio transcriptions printed in large letters. The trusted neighbor held the letter I had written, waiting only for the right moment to deliver it. The detective observed from a distance, camera in hand, recording every detail. And then they appeared, my husband and the mistress, walking side by side, smiling as if the world belonged to them. He adjusted his shirt with the same pose as always. She, with her loose laughter, exhibited an air of someone who never imagined she could be caught. To those looking from outside, they seemed like an ordinary, unconcerned couple. But fate was about to tear away that mask. The instant they passed near the mural, a group of neighbors began to whisper. One of them pointed to the featured photo, showing my husband hand in hand with her at a hotel door. The buzz grew, and soon more people gathered around. It was then that the neighbor read my letter aloud. These are proofs registered with a notary. In them are dates, receipts, audios, and testimonies that reveal the betrayal and attempted fraud against my family. This is not gossip. It's the truth, and everyone has the right to see it. The impact was immediate. The square, which before was noisy, plunged into a heavy silence, broken only by whispers of disbelief. Cell phones were raised, flashes fired. The truth was spreading before everyone's eyes. My husband stood motionless, eyes wide, trying to articulate words that wouldn't come. The mistress, nervous, tried to hide her face behind her purse. But it was too late. The public recognized them, pointed at them, whispered their names. The social tribunal had been installed, and the verdict wouldn't be long in coming. A lady, known to everyone in the neighborhood, spoke in a firm voice. "I saw them together the other day. I thought it was a coincidence. Now I see it was true." That comment ignited the public. What was once doubt became collective certainty. Suddenly, a small tumult formed. People began to argue among themselves, some laughing nervously, others indignant. The noise grew, and soon the confusion caught the attention of those passing by on the street. More onlookers joined, transforming the moment into a spectacle impossible to ignore. The sound of a siren echoed in the distance, not because of violence, but because someone, frightened by the crowd, had called the firefighters. When the vehicle approached, the scene gained even more official contours. The firefighters descended, opened a path through the crowd, and asked what was happening. And there was my son, among them. Wearing the uniform, with a serious countenance, he approached without immediately understanding. But it was enough to look at the mural for his expression to change. He recognized his father, recognized the woman, recognized the shame. His face, previously firm, crumbled into silence. My husband tried to justify himself, his voice trembling. "This isn't true. It's a setup. It's a trap." But nobody believed him. Not in the face of the printed evidence, the clear photos, the transcribed audios. Each attempt at defense was drowned out by the murmurs of the crowd, by the accusing looks, by the glaring evidence. The climax was complete. The man who for years was seen as an exemplary husband, honest merchant, family man, was now exposed in the public square as a traitor and conspirator. And the mistress, previously confident, now trembled under the weight of the gazes. The firefighters, after realizing there was no physical danger, retreated, but their presence had already sealed the moment. There were official witnesses. There was authority on the scene. The shame could no longer be erased. And I, standing, observed everything with a racing heart. I didn't need to shout, didn't need to push, didn't need to lower myself. I simply let the truth speak. And the truth, that day, spoke louder than any lie could sustain. The square boiled like a disturbed anthill. The mural was still there, imposing, surrounded by people commenting on each detail out loud, as if betrayal were an inevitable spectacle to witness. My husband tried to shrink his shoulders, but it was too late. All eyes were on him. The mistress, nervous, kept her head down, pressing the purse against her chest, as if she could hide behind a piece of fabric. And then one of the neighbors, in a firm voice, shouted, "I did see you. I saw both of you leaving the hotel on the highway." The words resonated, spreading like gunpowder. The whispers transformed into open accusations, and soon several voices rose confirming meetings, suspicious glances, whispered conversations that, until then, had been ignored. What was once doubt became collective certainty. My son, still in his firefighter uniform, walked to the mural. The crowd made way, silent, as if knowing that moment would be decisive. He stopped in front of the photos, read the captions, analyzed the receipts. His silence hurt more than any word. When he finally raised his eyes, he confronted his father. There was in his eyes a mixture of disbelief and desperation. "Dad, is it true?" he asked, his voice breaking. My husband tried to speak, but his voice didn't come out. He just babbled disconnected phrases. It doesn't look like... It's a lie." But faced with the evidence, faced with the gazes, there was no room for excuses. The mistress, cornered, tried to move away, but was surrounded by whispers and raised cell phones. Some filmed her shamelessly, others just commented. She was always two-faced, pretended to be a family friend all this time. What a disgrace. My son breathed deeply, and in a gesture of courage, spoke loudly for everyone to hear. "I was on duty that day. I saw you with my own eyes entering that place." The silence that followed was sepulchral. His word, clean and honest, sealed any doubt that might remain. My husband, pale, lost his strength. He tried to grab his son's arm but was rebuffed. The gesture, simple and dry, hurt more than any slap. The entire square witnessed. The bond between father and son was breaking there, in front of everyone. The police, called because of the tumult, arrived shortly after. 2 officers approached, asked for calm, collected quick testimonies. There was no immediate crime, but there was enough scandal to be recorded in a report. One of the officers, leafing through the evidence, shook his head in silence, not as an authority, but as a shocked citizen. A woman from the neighborhood, known for her sharp tongue, raised her voice. "This man didn't just deceive his wife. He deceived all of us." The comment ignited murmurs of agreement. What was previously just a domestic tragedy now became public shame, a collective scandal. My husband, trying to recover his composure, rehearsed a speech. "You don't understand. This is her trap. It's envy." But before he could finish, someone raised their phone showing one of the detective's videos, images of him and the mistress walking hand in hand, entering a hotel. The crowd erupted in indignant comments. He, defeated, lowered his head. The scene ended with him being escorted by the police to the exit of the square, not because he had committed a crime there, but because the tumult had become uncontrollable. The mistress followed him, in tears, and the crowd, like a court without judges, condemned them with looks, murmurs, and scornful laughter. And I, standing beside the mural, felt my heart both heavy and relieved at the same time. I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't need to invent anything. I simply left the truth exposed. And that day, in front of everyone, the mask fell once and for all. After that day in the square, nothing ever returned to how it was before. The scandal echoed throughout the town, spreading like wildfire in dry straw. In a few hours, videos of the mural, audios, and photos were already circulating in message groups. What was secret transformed into public matter, and my husband ceased to be just the betrayer, to become also the man who tried to rob his own wife. The pressure was so great that he ended up feeling ill that same night. Taken to the hospital, he stayed in an observation room, but there too he found no refuge. Doctors and nurses whispered, discreet glances crossed. The case was already known, and there was no silence capable of hiding what everyone was commenting on. The mistress at his side tried to console him, but her presence only increased the humiliation. It was like exhibiting, in public, the open wound he was trying to deny. A nurse, delivering a glass of water, murmured to another, "How can someone have the courage to betray their own family and also try to take what isn't theirs?" He heard, and the expression on his face showed that, for the first time, he felt the real weight of his choices. While he languished in excuses and shame, I grew stronger. With my lawyer at my side, I filed for divorce with all the evidence attached: messages, receipts, audios, photos, transcriptions. There were no loopholes. The judge, analyzing the case, was direct. He recognized the attempted asset fraud and guaranteed protective measures so that neither the bakery, nor the house, nor the family assets would be touched. My husband lost more than the marriage. He lost the trust of his son, who no longer wanted to listen to him. He lost the respect of the town, which now saw him as an example of shame. He lost the mistress who, faced with public exposure and financial ruin, disappeared like smoke in the wind. And me, I remained, firm, whole, rebuilding my life little by little. The mornings at the bakery, previously so heavy, returned to having the smell of hope. The hot bread coming out of the oven seemed to say, "You survived." The look of customers, many of them full of empathy, reminded me that pain can transform into strength when we don't let ourselves be defeated. My son became my greatest companion. We worked side by side, laughed when we could, cried when it was inevitable. But, above all, we supported each other. The wound opened by betrayal was deep, but the bond between mother and son was the balm that healed us. One Sunday, passing by the same square where everything had happened, I heard two neighbors commenting, "She transformed humiliation into courage." It wasn't she who lost, it was him. I smiled discreetly. I needed nothing more. Today, in telling this story, I don't carry shame. I carry learning. I discovered that a woman's greatest strength emerges when they try to take from her everything she holds most sacred: her dignity, her family, her history. I didn't just survive the betrayal. I was reborn. And if you've followed me this far, tell me in the comments which city you're watching from. I want to know how far this story has reached. Don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to the channel, because here you'll always find stories of life, courage, and overcoming. And now, click on one of the 2 videos appearing on screen. I'm sure you'll be hooked until the end.